Welcome to Sleuth TV Live, episode 1, season 1. I'm very excited to be here. My name is Don Brown. I am the CTO and co-founder of Sleuth, a tool to help you track and improve your DORA metrics. Our session today, season 1 is Sleuth TV Live, is going to be about DORA metrics. What we're going to do is we're going to explore what are they, how to measure them, how to use them, how not to use them. These are some of the questions and topics that we'll be discussing in season 1. The episode that you're watching today, either live or on replay, is going to be exploring kind of the what of DORA metrics. What are the metrics? Where do they come from? What's the history? What is DORA even? Of these 4 metrics, how do you measure them? Things like that. We want to explore the what with a little bit, just a little bit of the why thrown in there. So what are we here to talk about today? As a topic, let's start with DORA Metrics 101. We are here to talk about, as I said, kind of the what of DORA metrics, not so much how to use them, but really what are they? How do you measure them? Where does it even come from? Now, this is kind of my thing, I understand, but I'm someone who needs to understand things from first principles. I can't just dive into a topic and just take someone's word for it and move on. I need to know why. Where does it come from? What's the context? What's the history? I think it has to do with my old days back when I used to preach. And I would never want to do a topic without researching the hell out of it. So I'm going to kind of bring this same approach to this DORA 101 topic, where we're going to talk about, as I said, what the metrics are, the history, and where does it come. And if you're watching this on replay, we'll put the chapters down at the bottom so that you can skip ahead to parts that you're interested. If you're watching it live, well, you are the lucky ones because you get to be part of the conversation. Well, I guess afterwards people can too. Just use comments, as I said. Welcome for everyone. Oh, wait, we have someone else to chat about. Ben is working remote, trying to break into development, and I'm a huge fan. Excellent. Development is pretty damn fun. I will not lie. I could not have picked a better career to go into. 25 years, you'd think that I'd be tired of it, but I'm not. It's too much fun. There's just too much variety. It's such a great field. Okay, let's talk about DORA metrics. But before we want to talk about DORA metrics, I want to understand what makes the best teams work. Actually, so let me even take a step back from that. In order to understand the DORA metrics, it's important in any solution. This is my rant. I know sometimes I get a little ranty, but it goes beyond just the problem that we're solving. And I see this all the time in software engineering, where there are so many solutions, there's so many cool things out there, so many new techniques, new libraries, new approaches, new philosophies, new certifications to get, that we get so interested in finding those answers and then trying to apply them to our case without stopping and saying, what problem was this solution originally created to solve? Because that context will help you a lot in knowing if this is a right solution to apply to your case. And DORA metrics is no example. This isn't just zero context. Here are 4 metrics that everyone should track, and it's going to make everybody better for however you define better, all these kind of things. So you need to understand what it's trying to solve. And where I think the story all begins is the DORA team. And the main thing that I've distilled from all this, and I'll go into this in a little bit minute, is they wanted to understand what makes the best teams work. Now, how they define best is the teams that were more likely or more able to deliver on their business goals. So that's important to kind of understand how they're oriented. They want to know what makes the best teams work if there's metrics that strongly correlate to these best teams. And not just any metrics. They wanted to focus on software delivery metrics because they had a theory that how a team delivers software has a direct and strong correlation to, if not causation, to how well that team produces and achieves its business goals. So again, that's what we're solving. We're not solving how do we write the most code. We're not solving how do we even make the most money necessarily. It's really how do these teams that achieve their business goals, what software delivery approach do they use? This isn't 4 metrics to cover all of software, really focusing on software engineering. So let's kind of start at the beginning. DORA Metrics really probably started back in, let me see if I can find it here. So in 2014, I should have probably scrolled it to the top here. 2014 was the first State of DevOps report that was sponsored by Puppet. What they were trying to do is take this movement that was sweeping the world, DevOps. What is DevOps? Oh, we could talk for a whole hour. What is DevOps? It's interesting to note that the author of the term DevOps specifically has never defined the term, because we've seen what happens when you try to define Agile, Scrum, all that. It goes down this other vendor-driven rabbit hole. So for right now, for the purposes of our discussion and how I understand the report, it's saying as you bring development and operations together, what are some of the practices and the outcomes of this, and tracking that movement and looking at the teams that are doing this and how they're progressing through it. So this started in 2014. The goal here was to survey people in different companies to try to understand what makes those companies work. One of the things that came out of for the next 3 years was these 4 metrics. And it's important to note, actually, this is a 2014 report. This has been going on for a very long time. In fact, 2021 was the latest one. And in fact, if you go to and Google for DevOps today, which I believe is somewhere around here, you'll get prompted to be part of the survey to define it. So far they have surveyed 30,000 organizations, not people, not teams, organizations, to understand how they work, what practices they're using, and how that's working out for them. So it's a survey. It's survey-generated things. The people who created DORA, which, by the way, stands for DevOps Research and Assessment, because what happened was in 2014, I'm trying to get this all right here, 2014, the State of DevOps report, sponsored by Puppet, people that were working on this and a few other people came together and say, hey, let's focus on this. We think this is a really interesting problem to understand how people are delivering software and help them improve. And so they created DORA, the DevOps Research and Assessment Group. This was actually a startup, which not only helped fund this report and also created this book. Let me see, I had the book. Here it is, the Accelerate book, which some of you might have read. Any Accelerate book fans out there? I have to admit, I think this was also my first experience on DORA, is reading this book, where it talks about the DORA metrics and goes into detail on a lot of the methodology of how they created it. So they created a startup around the research and then tools to help. This was eventually bought by Google in, I want to say 2018-19. I think it's at the end of 2018, if I remember correctly. It was bought by Google, and what Google did is then let these people focus on the research part. And so every year they put out this report that looks at all these different practices. Boy, there is so much stuff to talk about in the State of DevOps report, which we don't have time for because I want to focus on the 4 things. Start with the 4 metrics. So what they did, as I mentioned, is they wanted to look at software delivery, and they wanted to find metrics that strongly correlated to output. Oh, before I get into that, I just wanted to drop a link. By the way, if you haven't read this blog post already, I highly recommend it. Let's see if Google doesn't block me from my own stream. I've had that happen before. It might have gotten marked as spam. Anyways, take a look. This is Jez Humble, who's one of the authors of DevOps Report. He kind of talks about the history of DevOps, the DORA group, why they started it, how they went through Google. And of course, this is written in 2019, which they've come out with reports since. So anyways, great bit of history there. Anyways, the thing that we want to talk about here is this main realization or main learning from this, and this is what Accelerate book focuses on. These 4 metrics, which they found strongly correlate to engineering performance, specifically achieving organizational goals. These metrics are deployment frequency. This is measuring how often you deploy to production, is what they were caring about. Change lead time. When you deploy it to production, how long does it take to get there? Change failure rate. Sorry, I always do these in this one, and this one. So it's try not to read it because that screws me up from my little spiel. Change failure rate. That's number 3. Number 3, change failure rate. which is when you do change production, what percentage of those deployments fail, however you define fail. That's a whole other massive topic. And then finally, time to restore service, also known as mean time to recovery. When you do fail, on average, how long are those failure periods? And what's interesting about this study is they didn't just say that these are the 4 metrics. They then put boundaries or categories around them and found that there are 4 classifications of teams: elite, high, medium, and low, based on how you score in these metrics. And they found it was the elite teams, the teams that scored in this certain rate, change failure rate 0 to 15%. They're deploying at least 1 time a day. They're able to ship something out to production in less than an hour. This is what defines elite, and this is the group statistically that they found correlates to high-performing team, which is interesting. Another thing that's interesting, while we're just kind of talking about DORA in general and these metrics in general, is how that is accelerated over time. So in 2018, unfortunately, this latest report only goes back to 2018, but what you can see is that teams were previously categorized themselves as elite is 7%. By 2021, it jumped up to 26%. So you can see over time, teams are becoming more and more elite by adopting this practice of faster delivery. And that's actually something probably that I did want to mention. Let me see if I can even find it in here. One of their main learnings from this is that people need to improve their change approval process and move to trunk-based development. This was one of the biggest things I find. And if you think about the metrics, they are really a reflection of what you would see if a team adopted trunk-based development, meaning that changes go into one trunk that everybody shares, and that's shipped frequently out to production. Not necessarily continuous deployment per se, but that changes are making it out on a daily basis. And they found that trunk-based development specifically is what highly correlated with these metrics and highly correlated with high-performing teams. In fact, in just 2 months of adopting trunk-based development, they found that teams saw a 20x improvement in release frequency with 0 increase in incidences. Now, this probably could deserve a whole other topic, and maybe we will actually. By the way, if there's any interesting topic that you want to see explored, feel free to ask questions here, but also leave in comments down below because we're always trying to figure out what we want to do in future episodes. Anyways, what they found is that trunk-based development was key. What's interesting is how controversial this is. I think it's a little bit less controversial nowadays, but at the time in 2014, 15, 16, highly controversial. The traditional approach is if you want to have better software, then you need to actually deploy slower, put more QAs, more gates into the process to make sure that that code is right. I remember back when I was with the military, what we would do is we would, for every piece of software we developed, we would have, what were they called? They were called like test plans, written test plans, tens, hundreds of pages of Word documents that we would then give to our testers who every time we do a change, they would walk manually through all of these test plans to make sure that the software was still okay. That was kind of the process back then. And I've seen this even in modern times. I'll give you a story about Confluence. So Confluence is a product. It's a wiki collaboration platform that's part of the Atlassian. Atlassian sells this today. When I was with the Confluence team in when was this? Maybe 2018 or so, we were starting to have some stability problems. We were increasing the size of the team, wanting to get more stuff out, feeling some competitive and market pressure. But we were having more incidences. We were having more times where we were breaking customers' experience, usually more minor changes. We called them P0 through 3. So P3 is kind of like, it's annoying, there's a workaround. P0 is everything's hard down. We're having a lot of P3s, P2s. And so the approach that people took was, hey, we need to slow this down. So at the time, Confluence was deployed, I think it was trying to do once a day, but in practice, it turned out to be about 2 or 3 times a week. And the initial reaction to this problem was, hey, let's actually deploy it every couple weeks. Let's even slow it down further. And as much as we all know that's not the right answer, kind of like the right answer to a project that's behind schedule is to throw more people at the project. We've known for years through Fred Brooks' Mythical Man Month book that this is not the answer. I think also now with the DORA report, we actually have more hard scientific findings that say a faster release process actually does a better job and actually is better from a failure standpoint. It's still the natural reaction is the opposite. Our natural reaction is we're having problems, slow it down, be more careful. So I think that's really interesting. It's really interesting because the problem of how to measure engineering and how to what constitutes good engineering practices is something that gets a lot of attention over time. Everyone wants to be able to put numbers. You think about it, engineering is numbers driven, and it's also the field which has the fewest metrics. Sales metrics, oh, we got tons of sales metrics. Support metrics, contact rate, ARR, finance metrics, tons of metrics. And then you go to engineering and we say, no, you can't measure us. You'll do it wrong. Lines of code, clearly wrong. Number of commits, wrong. Pull requests merged, wrong. Tickets resolved, wrong. And this is a little bit of a rant, but I think that desire still remains. In fact, it's a little bit hypocritical, right? We're all like, we're analytics driven. We don't ship something until we have facts, numbers to prove it's correct. And yet when it comes to looking at our actual performance, we immediately pull back. And anytime you try to measure anything, it's wrong. What makes DORA unique is this is the first time that I know of, and please correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm missing something. It's, let's just say one of the first times, just to couch it a little bit, where we're able to actually put hard numbers to something, a metric to something, and actually has science to back it up. This isn't just us guessing. This isn't somebody saying, I think lines of code, or I think this, or I think that, or in my experience of 2 teams, this is the right answer. This is 30,000 organizations, 30,000 teams. Maybe it might have been teams. Anyways, not the point. Where they looked at all this data and they found that these 4 metrics matter. So again, are these the only 4 metrics you should ever care about? No, but these are 4 metrics that actually have the backing of science. Again, understanding their context. It's important not to take them out of context and say these are the only 4 metrics that ever matter. But in this context, these actually have some research behind them, which is exciting. It's exciting to be able to actually have an answer. When you have a business person saying, how are you doing? Not just say, great, or has the team delivering? Sure. But actually be able to point to something and say, look, we are in an elite category of engineering efficiency. We are delivering things at the highest levels that have been proven to correspond to teams that are also in the highest levels. Well, that's kind of exciting to be able to do. Again, you can go too far on it. We're going to do a session later about how to use these metrics and how not to use these metrics, because like any answer, as soon as you have the answer, the desire is to now apply it everywhere. And this is the silver bullet. As you'll hear, if you haven't already, many times in your software career, there are no silver bullets. This is not a silver bullet. I am not saying it is a silver bullet. I'm not putting my vendor hat on and saying this is the answer to all problems. But do not diminish how exciting it is to have an answer. Again, in a certain context. I think I have not been keeping up to my sections. What do you think, by the way? Maybe this is a good time to pause. What has been your experience? How many people have actually tried to measure or even think about DORA metrics? I'm curious. While we answer that, there is a chat that I wanted to respond to, and that is Sarah asking, what are the reading materials you recommend if I want to learn about DORA? If you're interested in DORA, like the organization, then I would probably say that link that I tried to post, and I think it got rejected by our spam filters. As I said, this is the first episode. We're still figuring this out. But the thing by that is really good. All the State of DevOps reports, honestly, if you want one thing to do, I would go read the State of DevOps reports, because yes, they cover the 4 metrics, but they cover so much more. I'll give you an example. Let's just skim down here in this. State of DevOps reports, yes, it looks at these 4. It found some crazy things, that people in the elite group have a 6,570 times faster change lead time. Okay, that's pretty cool, I guess. They talk about methods and actual things that people have done, and this part is really interesting. They actually go into adoption, private cloud versus hybrid cloud. They actually look at how people are adopting different techniques, why they're adopting different techniques. Lots of interesting information. So if you're wanting to improve how your team works, in particular how you adopt DevOps principles, I highly recommend the State of DevOps right here. So this is where I would start. If you're brand new to everything, I would definitely take a look at the Accelerate book. These are good places to go. As I mentioned, just because, hey, come on, man, I got to pimp my own company a little bit every now and then. There's also our Sleuth TV channel. And if you're not a fan of video, which many people are not a fan of video, which I recognize and am cool with, then we also have some other information on our website, which is here. If you go click on Library and TV, you can see blog posts that kind of cover some of these topics, as well as Google. Google's actually also a really good source of information. But now that we have some time, we have some responses to some of the questions. Let me go through them. And let's see. So anyways, that was one of them. Where do you learn more about DORA? That's what I would recommend, the Accelerate book. Really the first half of the Accelerate book. The second half goes into their scientific methodology. So if that's interesting to you, then I recommend it. If you're just wanting practical advice, you can probably skip that part. Mike says, we're moving in that way, but getting dev teams to adopt it has been slow. Ooh, that's actually a really interesting point, Mike. I'm curious, why do you think it has been slow? This is something, so starting your own company, one thing they do is they put you through sales training. Well, I put myself through sales training because I don't know anything about sales, right? I'm a developer, I'm a coder, I'm an architect, I'm management on occasion, but I am not a salesperson. Anyways, one thing they teach you in sales is always answer a question with a question, which always makes it a little tricky when you're dealing with a stream where people can't respond. There's actually a 10-second delay from when I see something and when you see it, which is kind of interesting. Anyways, I'm curious why you think it's slow. This actually probably would be a whole great topic, DevOps, DORA Metrics adoption. So next week, we're going to cover how to use DORA Metrics. So I wonder if I might make that a sub point. But I guess my answer, well, I guess you didn't ask a question, but my answer to the question that you didn't ask, but you might have asked, which is, how do I help my team adopt it? And I think this is where understanding the context helps. Like, what is DORA Metrics good for? If you don't have the problems DORA Metrics are trying to solve, then it may not be that valuable to you. We're going to talk, as I said, in a future episode in more depth about that. But here's one thing that I would ask is, how often do you deploy? Because I found in my experience, there's one really good indicator of team morale. Let me step back. There's one practice which I found strongly correlates to high team morale and a sense of accomplishment in getting something done. And that is having the ability, each developer has the ability to push something to production. Even better if they can push it within hours and not within days or weeks. The reason is because as developers, I mean, if you think back to maybe why you got into software development in the first place, you wanted to change the world. You wanted to do something, right? You didn't want to just, be part of a cog in some machine. Like you want to ship stuff. You want to make people happy. You want to deliver value. And so adopting practices where you're delivering more and more value and you're empowered to deliver value, I find is very empowering, very exciting, and really helps team morale. So I would probably focus on that aspect of it, which, by the way, I have to also pimp this. I think it's in my contract somewhere. I'm just kidding. I don't have a contract. But it's this book, 0 to 100 Deploys a Day. If you are on this journey or thinking about going on this journey of how to move from not deploying very often to deploying very often, my co-founder, Dylan, and me, I wrote like 2 paragraphs. So I will say that I co-authored a book on how to go from 0 to 100 deploys a day, which might be interesting. It talks a lot about tips and tricks. Yes, DORA metrics are involved and whatever, but there's a lot more to it because let's be honest, most problems in software are not a technology problem. They're people problems, they're communication, they're process problems, and this is no different. So anyways, I recommend this book if you are interested. That could also help. And let's see, Wendy had an answer for me. I've tried but found the standardization for each of our teams is the key for DevOps and Jira. The standardization of each of our teams, that is a really interesting point. So it reminds me, and I don't know if this is exactly what you're talking about, Wendy, but I just want to bring it up. There was something in here in this talk about his journey. Or was it? Was it this one? No. This one. Where it talked about, I probably shouldn't try to read and talk at the same time. But one thing that he found is that people often with a transformation, they try to do it all at once. And that generally goes pretty poorly, if not is really frustrating. So one thing you might want to consider, and maybe you're already there, and I'm not going to make any assumptions in your case, but I will say that it reminded me of this piece of wisdom, which is when you're trying to eat an elephant, how do you eat an elephant? Bite by bite, I think it is. I'm totally screwing that up. But the idea is that sometimes with DevOps, we think we need to get everybody on the same tool, everyone on the same process or whatever. And they found in this group, and I found in my career as well, sometimes it's better to do it in piecemeal. For example, one thing I like to do is you measure, make one change, measure again, make another change, measure again. Again, I'll talk more about this next week, but this is something that's worked for me. Again, I have no idea if this is right for you, but I just thought I'd make that point for anyone who it might be right for. All right, let's see who we have. Oh, Richard from Idaho. Welcome, Richard from Idaho. One cool thing about YouTube is that you can actually watch the past and see the stream as it was live. Disadvantage, your questions won't be seen. So, but that's why I said if you're watching this replay or later, feel free to leave a comment because I do want to hear from you. I want to hear what's works, what's interesting, what problems you're having. Sarah says, better late than never. That's right. Better late than never. As long as it's every day, I feel like I'm trying to stretch the DORA analogy too far now. All right, Mike says, in my opinion, the goals are more driven by getting features out with no time allowed for getting the value out of our reports. Goals are more driven by getting more feature out with no time allowed for getting value out of reports. Ooh, Mike, this is something I feel like we could dig into and talk for hours, but I don't want the stream to go for hours. I mean, we could, right? But I'm thinking it'll go for another 25 minutes or so. And I haven't even started talking about the DORA metrics. That's okay. That's why it's fun to do it our first time. We get to see where it goes. Anyways, there was one thing, Mike, which I read, which I found really interesting. There is a talk, let's see. There's Continuous Delivery is a channel on YouTube. Let me share this real quick. And his latest video on who are software managers evil or developers dumb. That man is, or whoever writes that for him is a master at catchy titles, hooky titles, if you will. Anyways, he had a really interesting point where he pointed to a survey that was done, a small survey, but still it was interesting, where what they looked at is how do managers evaluate developer performance versus how do developers evaluate performance. And one thing that was interesting is he said, let's see if I can even pull it up. Whoa, we don't want to actually watch the thing. Let me just minimize it. I think he was right here-ish. Yeah, I don't know how well you can see that, but it said managers define productivity with a heavy emphasis on outcomes and efficiency, whereas developers evaluated productivity on activities. In other words, a developer said, hey, if I shipped 5 PRs today, then I was super productive. Managers, on the other hand, actually rate activity really low. Managers are more caring about what's the final outcome. So it's interesting that you kind of say goals are being driven by people who just want to get features out, which makes sense. Management will tend to be wanting to say just looking at the outcomes. The trick, though, is, of course, to balance that with how we get things done. Because in a manager, it's kind of like, I don't want to see what the cook is doing in the kitchen. I just want the food at the end of the day. But that means it's on us as developers, on team leads, on tech leads, things like that. It's on us to make sure that we're having the right processes in place to have the right outcome. And so that's something I always talk to people. Developers are like, oh, I have no time to write tests. I have no time to do this, no time to do this. And say, well, it is your job to do that. Like, your job is to deliver the outcome, which I don't believe you can do without writing tests. I don't believe you can do without taking into account quality and not just speed. At the end, that is faster. Sometimes you need to go slower to go faster. So Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting problem, and it's something that I think developers have been fighting and wrestling with for ages. And of course, we're not going to solve it in this time, but it's definitely a tricky one. Wendy Morgan, deployment frequency for us depends on desktop or web products. Right, that's interesting. So yeah, and I've also heard that with mobile, where people will look at deployment frequency and say, well, I'm doing mobile. I can't go to the App Store every day. We can talk more about that, but it's, yeah, what is a change? What is deployment? Okay, I need to talk about the metrics at the end of this, but these are great questions, or great points. I take issue with change lead time because there can be a time effort left of the first commit. Okay, one for you, Richard, which is a great point, by the way. So let's park that, and I want to cover it. Remind me if I don't remember, I forget, Richard, that when we go through change lead time and what it is and how you measure it, there's some controversy there, because there's a difference between how the DORA report measures it and how people interpret it, and they mean different things and can be used in different ways. So I don't want to steal my thunder, I guess, but I'll have that in a minute. DORA ignores this. Have you thought about going to Azure boards for True Start? Yes, all of these types of things. We will come back to it, I promise. Tracy Black, how could morale be boosted for beginner devs that struggle to ship once a day? Actually, that's a really good question. Big question, right? So your question is for beginner devs who are just getting started and are having a hard time ship once a day, how can morale be boosted? And I think the answer is, honestly, and just in full disclaimer, Tracy is actually on my team. So when I'm criticizing his manager, I'm criticizing myself. I would say that a lot of that is going to be on the manager for making sure that that person is in a position to succeed. That's where I'm a big fan of managers being held accountable for the team and not just just repeating status reports all day. And I think one of the ways is to find ways to find the appropriate task for the appropriate person. If you give a back-end task to a front-end person, they're going to struggle. Sometimes you have to do that, but generally speaking, avoid that. If you give a hard task to a beginner who doesn't understand the context, they're going to have a hard time. So it's a great question, and it's one that I think in part can be solved by putting that back on the manager and saying, are they putting you in a position to, not you, I mean beginner devs, and to succeed? It's good. I'd be curious what you think about that, but that's kind of what I think. Richard says, enable them to solve those problems themselves. Exactly. It's about enabling. It's that whole teaching to fish, first fishing for them, that kind of thing. Put them in a position to succeed. All right. Great questions. I love this interaction. I have to say, I was a little bit worried that it would be an hour of just me ranting and talking, but this has been exciting to be having people have comments and interacting and asking questions and making points. This is good. This is good. All right. Let's keep her going. Oh, short history of DORA. Damn it. So I actually, sometimes I just skip past my slides. That's okay. We're moving to the next one. What are the DORA metrics? Also covered. Look at this. This is going to be fun for whoever has to do the chapters later on to figure out where the sections are. The fun of a live stream, right? No second takes. Do it live. All right, so let's talk about what are the DORA metrics and how do you measure them. So the first one is deployment frequency. Now, when I said deployment frequency, I didn't define a couple things. One is I did not define what a deployment is. I didn't even define where you're deploying to. And these are kind of interesting. From the standpoint of the survey, again, remember that DORA metrics as originally created were a survey that was given out to people. And I think we even have the definition. Let me pull up the definition here. So it was called, for the primary application service you work on, how often does your organization deploy, damn it, I'm trying to select this paragraph and I'm not doing a great job at it. How often does, let me zoom in. Oh yeah, that's way better. Oh, sorry about that. How often does your organization deploy code to production or release it to end users? So what they are looking at is this question was defined as from the start of when you change production or whatever your target environment, when do the end users see it? What's interesting about it is, kind of as we talked about before, if you have a desktop app or you have a mobile app, you can't do it multiple times a day. If you have a web app, you can, But even that is probably going to be constrained by team size, right? Like if you have 5 people on the team and they're deploying once a day and your deploys take a couple hours, you don't have enough hours in the day to have everyone deploy the code all the time. So we end up batching things up. So traditionally, this is defined as the moment change hit production. How I measured in my case, this is live. This is our Circle CI system where we do a deployment. And let's look at a deploy that happened earlier today. We go through a bunch of checks, then we deploy it to staging, and then we deploy it to, then we approve it. This, by the way, we have automated with Sleuth. So we actually use Sleuth to implement complete autonomous continuous deployment, which I'm really excited about. We'll talk about that another time, probably another season, but just drop that little nugget in there. Anyways, we deploy it to staging immediately. This happens automatically. Once the tests are done, it goes to staging. Then it gets approved in some way. Actually, me not approving everything. I just did the integration. And then finally, it goes to production. So how we measure it in Sleuth is this job, once it's done, then we consider the code deployed to production. So we find the SHA, in this case here, we find the SHA of the change, and we track it at the moment that this ran. So that's how the DORA metrics themselves are done. I think there's a lot of value in going even farther. For example, you could also measure how often you deploy to staging. For example, this is a really useful technique if you are trying to see how long it can take, how often you ship a change or have a change ready for a mobile app that can't deploy every day, then measuring deployments to staging might be a useful way to see that frequency, even though you can't get it all the way to end users. So again, from the standpoint of the survey and the categories, it's about the end users. But I think that's where you have to go beyond just the metrics themselves and think about them a little bit more and see how these might apply or not apply to different aspects or problems that you're facing. And this is one example of them. So how long does it take to deploy to staging? That's the simplest case. That's where code actually changes and ships to customers. There's other kinds of changes though. I'm going to show you a little bit of Sleuth. So this is live data of us using our tool. And we track deployment frequency. We track the code changes, but we also track feature flag changes. Because if you turned on a major feature for one or multiple people of your customers, that's deploying something as far as they're concerned. In fact, that can cause incidences, that can activate code paths that weren't activated before, and that can cause all kinds of problems. So if you're looking at deployments, I would argue you can't just look at changes to code. You also have to look at changes to feature flags. And then there's another type of change which I found useful, and that is looking at changes created by an operations team that's running a runbook, where they're taking a change and they're pushing it out to production. Maybe they're clearing the database. Maybe they're deleting a cache. Maybe they're scaling up a cluster. That is a change that can have failure, that can cause an incident. That's worth measuring as well. So from purely a standpoint of the metrics as defined in the book, it's whenever your code ships to production. But I encourage you to think about it more than that. How could you measure not just the moment it hits production, but maybe the moment it hits staging? Or maybe when different kinds of changes, not just code changes, hit production. Maybe that would give you a little bit more complete understanding of what's all changing. Particularly as your team gets bigger, you start using feature flags more and more, which is, I know, another topic. One of these days, I'm thinking about maybe doing a series, maybe a season where we focus on techniques that elite teams use. And one of them, one of the first ones I would use is feature flags, because I am a massive fan of feature flags. But measuring different kinds of changes in production, these are things also to think about. So again, in summary, we have deployment frequency, and that's number of times that things are changed in production. But also think, and that's usually measured by when code actually ships. Oh, actually, one other point, just while I'm here, that I think is worth making is when your code ships, it can be interesting to know when code actually hits production, because in a modern system, you're actually not changing production all at once. You're actually you're starting a rolling upgrade. So some customers get new code, some customers get old. If you look at someone like Facebook, they have thousands of changes being rolled out to people at any given moment. So people are having 1,000 different variations of what is Facebook. That's an old stat, but I'm sure it's still the same. In fact, I would guess it's even more. So things to think about. So again, from the very simple, just measure when your code hits production, but the more you think about it, the more you think of all the different ways that changes can happen, where they can happen, might be worth measuring. Change lead time. So this one, let's go back to our definition because I'm starting to run out of time. Well, that's good. I was afraid I didn't have enough content. Always nice to know that you have a bit more content than you thought you might. Where was the book? Here. This is where we are. Lead time to changes. And this is the one that I think, Richard, we talked about that I wanted to bring up to you again. What is change lead time? And this is a misunderstood one. So as defined, it is the lead time for changes to go from code committed to code successfully running in production. Now, how you or I would interpret that, and in fact, how the official open source tool by the DORA group, which is called the 4 Keys, I'll pull it up here. This is the 4 Keys open source project. So if you want to know how to measure, the 4 Keys is one. Obviously, Sleuth is one of them. That's the tool that my company develops. But another one is this open source project. Trying to find the beginning of it. Sorry. The 4 Keys project. This is how they measure it as well. The first time a commit happens. What's interesting about that is 2 things. It's wrong in some ways, in both ways. So Richard makes the point that it's wrong in the sense of the coding didn't start on the first commit. The coding probably started earlier. Maybe it started when the issue was taken off the board or put into an in progress status. The other point to make, though, and I was watching this conversation in the RAND Slack group where they were talking to one of the people that works with Nicole, who was on the DORA group, and he asked her about this question, and Nicole said, no, what we were trying to measure is at the moment the code is ready to be shipped to when it hits production. So that's the moment that the pull request is merged. That's the moment that the change has been merged into trunk. It's not the 3 commits, the work in progress commits that the developer did beforehand. And the reason is because she wanted something that was, they wanted something that was easy to measure from a survey standpoint, something that was real clear. If you said, when did you start coding something? Oh, everyone said answers are going to be all over the place. But she wanted something that was really clear. Once the code is ready to go, how long does it take to get out production? That said, when we look at my product, or really anybody's products, when you're looking at change lead time, a lot of people find the most value in the breakdown, in how long it was in coding, how long it was waiting to be reviewed, how long it was being reviewed, and then how long it was deploying. So again, from a DORA Metrics standpoint, they were really caring about this last number. It's ready to go, how long to get deployed. But if you look at how to use the metrics, and I know that's another topic, but how to use the metrics, it's actually a lot more useful if you go even farther back in history. And as Richard points out, even going to the first commit might not be enough. You might need to go back even farther to when the code was started to work on by the developer, which is something that Sleuth is actually working on right now and will have out soon, where you can actually measure your change lead time that far back. So anyways, the point here is, how do you measure change lead time? It's the time from first commit, the easiest way, first commit to production, or you can measure it from the time of a merge to production, or you can do more of what's also called cycle time. You'll see cycle time mentioned sometimes, and that's looking at the whole process. In fact, some people measure cycle time to when the feature was first requested by the customer. Now that's obviously a massive timeline, but those are different ways you can measure it. But from a book standpoint, they say from first commit to when it's deployed. Change failure rate. The change failure rate is looking at when a change makes it out to production, what percentage of those fail. Now, I could probably spend another hour, and in fact, I even made a video specifically on this topic, and I'm speaking in Orlando at DevOps World on this topic. What is failure? All the different types of failure, how to measure it. But let me say that I think from a standpoint of metrics being useful, it's going to vary. The answer is going to vary depending on the team. The simplest answer for failure is when you cause an incident. However you have an incident management process defined, whenever an incident happens, that's failure. For some teams, they just simply measure when a rollback happens. When code's rolled back, that's probably a failure, so let's measure that as failure. Other teams might want to go deeper. They might want to look at metrics. They want to look at errors to measure failure. However you measure it, you need to figure out when that failure has happened, and then be able to figure out that the deployment is the cause, And then the percentage of healthy deployments to failed deployments, well, there's your change failure rate. How we do it in Sleuth, just to give it a little bit more of a practical standpoint, instead of just me waving my hand saying this is what failure is, what we do is we take a look at each deployment, and then we're measuring the deployment various health impacts. So we do anomaly detection on metrics if you want what I call a low-level source of failure. We'll look at sentry errors increasing, memory jumping, stuff like that. We'll also look at builds. Let's say you have a build that runs every 4 hours in production. If that fails, that's probably a failure. PagerDuty alerts, that can be a failure. Status page updates, different types of ways that you measure failure. And again, that's going to be dependent on each team. But somehow you measure failure, and then you're going to have times where it's going to detect it's unhealthy. So if you don't have a tool like Sleuth, then you probably have to integrate this into your incident impact system and be able to detect it. What we do with Sleuth is then we have to figure out which change was at fault. And how we do that is actually pretty simple. In Sleuth, we just say, if a failure happens, what was the last deployment? Let's call that the failed deployment. Does it work all the time? No, but the cost of gardening and trying to map failures back to 3 deployments and figure out which ones might be pretty high. So that's something to think about too. Metrics can be more and more accurate the more time you put into it. I know I'm skipping into tomorrow's or next week's topic, but something to think about is at what point do you have enough? You know, maybe with your metrics, all you need to do is do a survey, and that gives you all the information you need. But maybe you want to be more accurate and actually understand the actual numbers behind them. Then using a tool like Sleuth is important. 4 keys, there's other ways as well. And as much time as you want to spend on these metrics, you can get better, more accurate results out of them. But in this particular case, change failure is trying to figure out when your code failed or deploy failed, what percentages are successful, which percentage to which ones aren't. It's failed over total is actually how that would go. That's change failure rate. Mean time to recovery, on the other hand. This one's pretty straightforward. It's basically looking at when you have a failure period, how long on average do those failure periods last? Put in another way, when you have a failure period, how quickly can you recover on average? Now, there's different ways to think about this one. Wrong button. That's what happens when I have too many buttons in front of me. I actually wrote all the software for this yesterday, which I meant to stream on Twitch, but I didn't. Because sometimes I stream the development of Sleuth on Twitch, but that's another topic. Anyways, mean time to recovery is going to be looking at the length of your failure periods. There's a couple of things to think about in this. One is your mean time to detection. How quickly did you even detect that there was a failure period? And then 2, how long does it last? And they found for the metrics, the elite, going back to the elite ones, nope, not that one, not that one, is the elite are within less than 1 hour, they're able to restore service. So again, part of that depends on how you define failure. Is this a big thing? Is this a small thing? Database jumped 30%. Is that really a failure? For you, it may be. For someone else, it may not be. So you have to kind of think about really the mean time to failure, the mean time to recovery, and the change failure rate really are all fundamentally rooted in how you define failure. Wendy has a question. Let's switch over to that. So if you have 10 JIRA tickets in deployment and 1 fails, do you count a deployment as a failure, or do you count each ticket as a deployment? It'd be 1 out of 10. As I understand it, Wendy, when it comes to the metrics, it's the deployment itself, irrespective of how many changes are in that. Now, in Sleuth's case, what we do is we do break down the metrics per pull request. That's usually how we do it. But if you don't have any pull requests, then we just kind of group it all as 1 deployment. So, but you could do a similar thing with JIRA tickets. You could try to attribute the failure to each one, but from a pure metrics, DORA metrics standpoint, they treat the deployment as 1 and it failed as opposed to the other, if that makes any sense. So again, that's how DORA measures it. That's how the science is based on. That doesn't mean that there's not value in measuring failure at that lower level. It just gets really tricky though, right? Because you'd have to have a developer go in and figure out who to assign it to you, to which. You take that JIRA ticket and you add a tag called failed on it, and then you create a report which calculates which tickets failed and which ones didn't. Maybe that would work in your case. Maybe it wouldn't. So the risk would be larger deployments. Yes, Wendy, I think that's exactly correct. And that's probably one of the main things that people who subscribe to the trunk-based development where shipping changes out more frequently is you want to get that size down. The smaller deployment, the easier it is to understand, the easier it is to deploy quickly, the less likely it is to fail individually. And if it does fail, the easier it is to figure out what failed. If you ship 10 things out and one thing broke, you have to dig through each one to figure out what might have changed. But if you shipped out a change that was 5 lines of code and it fails, you know exactly what the problem was, you know exactly what to roll back, and your developer probably has a pretty good idea of what the problem was. So that's something I think one of the big lessons of DORA Metrics is to deploy more frequently actually improves the output of your team, whereas you'd think it would actually create so many problems it would slow you down, but actually speeds you up. It's kind of weird. Let's see, what do we have next? Oh, how to measure. Well, I already covered those. I don't think we need to go into each one of those. Let's go into final thoughts since we're getting close here to the end. I don't want to keep you for too long. I really appreciate you coming, by the way. This has been a lot of fun for me. It's been fun to interact. I love the comments and the interaction. That's what makes streaming fun, right? The videos or the blog posts, those are always there, but the comments and the interaction makes it fun. Anyways, my final thoughts are DORA Metrics. It's important to understand where the metrics come from and what they're trying to solve to see if it makes sense for you. As I said, the DORA Metrics team was looking at how the best teams work, and they had a discovery that trunk-based development was a great way to do it. And then how do you measure that? And they found that 4 metrics strongly correlate to high-performing teams, and teams that deployed more frequently, smaller, actually had better experiences and better outputs at the end of the day. So if you're looking to measure these, we talked about how to measure these. There's, as I said, many tools. Sleuth, just again, one more time, my product, you can do it. Sign up for a free trial. Everything I've been showing you today is actually live. You can check it out yourself. If you go to the Sleuth homepage, if you click on, well, try now for free, I think we'll do the login. You click on live demo, and you can actually see all this data that I've been showing you. Feel free to try that. There's other options such as the 4 Keys project where that will help you track it, or you can kind of come up with your own thing. There's plenty of options out there. I think they can really help you take your engineering efficiency to the next level. And that's why I wanted to start it with this topic, because as I said, I think if you want to improve something, your first step is to measure it. Your second step is to make a change, and then you measure it again, and you just repeat that cycle. The faster you repeat that cycle, the more lessons you learn, the more things you improve. So it starts with measuring. But then the next question is, okay, now that I measured, what changes should I make? What lessons can I pull from this? How can I use DORA Metrics, these 4 numbers, how can I use that to actually make my team better? Not just a dashboard that's pretty and gets people excited, but I want to actually improve my team. How does this help? Well, for that, you're going to have to come back next week where we're going to cover that exact topic. The DORA Metrics, how do you use them? How do you not use them? What if you're a team that is deploying every 3 months? Can DORA Metrics be useful? What if you're a team that's deploying 10 times a day? Can DORA Metrics still be useful? Spoiler alert, they can, but there's also ways that they cannot be useful, things that they don't work for. So anyways, we're going to cover all of that tomorrow, or next week. So if you're interested in that, please come by again. We'll be sending a message for all of you who signed up with links to this replay so you can watch it again, share it with your friends, put it up on a wall. I don't know, do something exciting with it. But you can also sign up for the session next time. I hope to see you all there. Thanks for coming, and till next time.